So I put my share screen. You should be able to share your screen.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so the floor is all yours, everybody. Yeah, Rebecca Maria Goldschmidt.
Hey guys. Thanks so much for letting me drop in. It's like always fun to come into a random Zoom meeting, and this is like a particularly fun one. So props to you guys for being in school during all this craziness. I just feel like I just finished my MFA here in Hawaii, and it was just, yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how folks who are still in school are trying to use this space creatively. So I really appreciate Champ for bringing me in. So I know there's folks who are like probably just listening, and that's totally cool. If you want to turn on your camera, that's awesome too. I thought we could have like a really quick, just kind of like, you can always throw it into the chat too if you're not feeling like speaking or using your mic. But I kind of wanted to ask people my first question, and then we can kind of like maybe hold on to some of those things and come back to them at the end before I like go into my whole spiel. So I'll just introduce myself really quick. My name is Rebecca Maria Goldschmidt. I'm an artist. I actually grew up in Chicago, but I'm currently living in Honolulu in Hawaii, which is Kanaka Maoli land. So the indigenous people of Hawaii are call themselves Kanaka Maoli. And yeah, I live on Oahu. It's a large city. Honolulu is the capital, and I consider this the kingdom of Hawaii and not the country of the United States. There's a long history there we could maybe go back into later at the end, but I like to say that I live in the kingdom of Hawaii. So yeah, my question for you guys was really like, what's one thing that you've seen in your just daily life in the past couple of weeks, months, that has like gotten you really angry? Like just like pissed. And I don't want you guys to necessarily reference like, oh well, I saw this thing online, or like I read this article, like something that you've like really truly concrete seen, like it like face to face, or like happening around you. It could literally be anything. You can throw it in the chat now, or if folks want to just like pop their mic on and jump in. I don't know, Champ, you're also welcome to um add something in there. I just wanted to like see where people's like, I know there's a lot of ways and I guess things to be angry or upset about right now, and so I just wanted to give us like a moment to be like, okay, what's pissing you off? Like just go for it. We could also do popcorn style, but I don't want to make anyone talk like if they don't want to, so I don't know you guys that well.
I would say, and my name is Nseke. I would say there's a lot of things that piss me off, but one that I deal with every day is I run Lake Merritt every day, and it's great that people are out and about being around the lake, but no one throws away their trash. They just leaves it there, blanket, Tupperware, food, especially Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. It's like, Jesus, clean up after yourself. So that just seeing that in the morning constantly and seeing the people who have to clean it up is like, especially like 4th of July, it was just crazy that day, the next 5th. So I would say just the super amount of trash that's left over by people after a party at Lake Merritt.
Thank you so much, Nseke. That's awesome. I mean, it's not awesome, but at least you're noticing, right? And I mean, I live in Hawaii. I totally get it. The beach is the same thing. Like people are pretty respectful, but there's a lot of places you go where you're like, what is this? Like, why? Okay, anyone else want to jump in?
One thing that makes me angry is when people like have a problem and they know they have a problem and like they're asking for a solution, but they don't actually want it. Like if you give them a solution, they're like, no, I don't want it or whatever. And like, they just like complain for basically no reason. It like really bothers me when people do that. So
Kind of getting stuck in that cycle of like complaint, but not really wanting to get out of there. Guilty. Anybody else? We'll take one more.
I could jump in if that's okay.
Go ahead.
One thing that pisses me off is so I live in Berkeley right now, and like I'm pretty close to Emeryville, and it just frustrates me to no end to see like all these businesses in this extremely gentrified area putting these like tiny Black Lives Matter printed in their window, and it's just like, I know it's all performative, and it just is frustrating to like be in a community that doesn't really actually address the issues, just does it on a very surface level, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like it doesn't feel genuine, or you're not sure. It's almost like the sign, you're not sure what's like behind that sign. Like it's pretty easy to just slap the slogan on. Okay, cool. Thanks, you guys. I know that what's happening in Berkeley is related to what's happening in Hawaii, but there's so much going on everywhere right now. It's just, I think when Champ was sending me the readings that you guys were doing and thinking about interventionist artworks, and I know a lot of you guys are not artists, but I think it's still important to understand like what are the tools that we have just in our everyday lives to maybe start speaking back to power in the ways that we can, or even just noticing, because the more that you notice, the more you're going to start thinking of solutions to those problems, right? And like hopefully you guys are all going to be engaged in like implementing solutions to those things that we're noticing. So I'm going to try to share my screen now. I was having some trouble putting the let me see here, putting my slides into my thing, so I might just show you guys some. Can you guys see everything okay? Like this folder stuff?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I'm gonna share this little presentation, and then I'll show you guys some images from my MFA exhibition. I know we have like an hour, so I'll try to be, I can get to like rambling, Champ knows this, but hopefully we can stay on time. So this is moi. I usually don't use these kinds of pictures of like romantic paradise Hawaii, but I felt like it's just important. I've been wanting to root myself a little bit more in thinking about the ocean. So I put this picture that I took, a friend of mine and I walked out. There's like a gigantic blue hole right here. I don't know if you can kind of see that. And she invited me to walk out to this space with her. And we sang an oli, which is like a Hawaiian blessing, before we like jumped into the hole. You basically walk across like a giant dead reef out to this hole. And I just wanted to share this image just as a kind of a reminder for myself, but also for you guys who don't know me, that I'm a person who's not from Hawaii, but I try to tread as responsibly as I can on this place, because it is a place that has a lot of contested political meaning as a series of islands that have been occupied by the United States. But at the same time, it is also, you know, like in the way that many of us probably think of nature, it's a part of us, it's a part of ourselves. So in kind of learning to reconnect with ourselves, we also are learning to treat the land in a way that is respectful and reciprocal. So I always try to start off my talk with like at least giving a sense of where I am. So this is Oahu in Mauna Lua Bay. Hawaiʻi is the name of the islands, all the island chains, and it's Kanaka Maoli. I'm Ilocana Jewish, so my family is actually from the northern Philippines, from Pangasinan. So my family is Ilocano and Pangasinense, if there's any Filipinos in the room. And I just wanted to talk, oops, come on. There we go. These were some of the vocab words that I pulled out of the Perini reading that you guys did. Perini, I think that's her name. Which was an awesome reading for me too, to like go back to some of the more radical artists that I think I've been influenced by in my life. I really was into like folk art and really colorful, bright, like combinations of collage and text and all kinds of different stuff when I was younger. And I think my political inclination led me to do more collective work and to start thinking more about what it means to actually change some of these systems or create new systems, or like she's mentioning in the reading, just use your imagination to envision something that could be completely different. So these were just some of the themes that I thought were like really awesome that I pulled out. This idea of disruption or interruption of the normal flow of information, intervention or being interventionist in that way, where you're just kind of like sticking yourself, inserting yourself. Like I always, because I ride my bike a lot, I also think sometimes of like sticking a stick like in the cog or in the spokes or whatever, like something that's going to jam or just at least make you kind of reconsider what the normal flow of like the status quo usually is. Education is important to me as a person who works as a teacher sometimes, or giving talks and stuff. Collectivity also, clearly, like I'll talk a little bit more about how all these things kind of thread through my work a little bit in a second. Reproduction, I think, is really awesome because I was trained as a photographer. So most of my background work is in photography. And I think a lot about how the replication of the image and the way that we share images now, especially that they're not as printed as much as they used to be, that basically like that one photo of like the smoke cloud coming up out of Beirut can then be replicated like ad nauseum or whatever, and how that influences our consciousness. And that's where representation, I think, is really important, but it's not like the only way to change things. But I do think, yeah, okay, I won't go down that road. But yes, distribution. I know you guys are talking a lot about this too, and I really enjoy making books and zines and printed materials. Sometimes I'll do posters or like even t-shirts and stuff like that. Screen printing. I've done a lot of printing for different movements here in Hawaii, for the grad student union, for the local 5, which is our hotel workers union that were on strike. We did some printing on the line down at the hotel. So stuff like that, I think, is traditionally like a radical practice, like getting involved in printmaking. Printmaking is always going to be at the heart of the revolution because it allows you to replicate an image quickly and easily without very much money. So new relationships, participation, anonymity, anti-capitalist, and then ally work. I wanted to sort of emphasize that as well because I also, like I mentioned in the beginning, try to do my work as responsibly as I can here in Hawaii. And I think that involves a lot of risk taking. It takes like risk taking, putting yourself into situations that you might not usually be in, but also to be there to stand by people when they need you. But I think also stepping back. So like, it's like that step up, step back kind of situation. I don't know if you guys use that phrase at all, but knowing when is a good time for you to use your voice to advocate for people, and knowing what privilege you have in certain situations, or stepping back and letting other people take the space and knowing that that's not necessarily your space to speak. Because maybe it's not a topic that you're 100% involved in, or maybe it's just not like your actual space. So yeah, I've been learning a lot of those things here in Hawaii, and I just kind of wanted to like pinpoint a couple of these things that you guys have been talking about in your conversations. Let me see here. So I wanted to talk a little bit about distribution, mainly because I think, I don't know if you guys are like going to do a zine or anything like that, but there were just a couple of quotes within that article that were really, I thought, important. I think she's talking to like the Beaver 16 people or something like that. And in speaking about like an exhibition can only like, interface with so many people. So if you guys go to, the Berkeley or whatever, to BAMFA, and there's show up, it's like how many people who are like going through Berkeley all at the same time are going to pass through that space. Like it's a percentage of those people who are going to see that. It's a percentage of people who come from San Francisco who are going to see that. And I think having us bound to these like white gallery spaces can be really limiting. So distribution in terms of bookmaking for me has been a really awesome way to just get the information and the images and everything out there. So personally, when my MFA show opened in March, I think we opened on March 8th or something, by the end of the week, everything was shut down because of COVID. So I spent like 3 years planning this exhibition, like creating it, and it went into the gallery space and everyone was stoked. We had a party, everything. But then by the end of, that week, no one could see it. And so I was like, shit, what do I do? Like, that was all my work. You know, I think a lot of people went through this experience in this past year. And it's still kind of happening, right? Because now most of the shows are online. Anyways, you guys know what the deal is, but one of the quotes that she mentions in this book, or one of the artists that she quotes, is talking about like the gallery is only going to be able to interface with a certain amount of people. I think if you're doing performance and stuff like that, like being in that space is so important. But how do you get those lessons and those stories and those everything else that's contained in that space? How do you get that to like move out into the rest of the community? How do you get the ideas to share? So these are just some of the books that I've made in the past couple of years. So this one was a reflection piece on the first trip that I did to the Philippines with another group of language students. So I came to UH to study Ilocano, which is my grandmother's native language, a language of the northern Philippines. It's like the third most spoken language in the Philippines. And we made this book together sort of as like a little like memory book, but everyone put reflections about their experience. Most people had maybe been to the Philippines or were born there, but there are a couple of us who had never gone before. And then we use this book sort of as like a fundraiser to offer free classes to the Ilocano community so people can still keep taking language classes. And it also kind of doubles as like, it's not so much a textbook, but there's a lot of vocabulary in there. So people who are buying this book or getting it or getting gifted it aren't just receiving like these reflections from a specific group of people. They're also like building their own vocabulary in Ilocano language. And it's also simultaneously funding more people like to learn the language. So it's just kind of, I feel like as an artist, you're always you're constantly trying to think of ways to, like, you have an idea in your head, right? You're like, oh, I really want to explore this thing. There's this something that's just coming through to me that I just want to like go there and explore what that is. And then sometimes there's ways where you're like, I need to do this really practical ass thing. And how am I going to use my knowledge of materials and my knowledge of like, you know, say bookmaking or sewing or, you know, like Champ works in like wood and sculpture. Like, how are you going to use those kind of materials to like address the situation? And for me, because I do a lot of work within the Filipino community, a lot of times that question is like, where are we going to get money? Where are we going to get the money to rent a space to gather our people together? And so the more you can, I've also been thinking a lot about historically how our communities have raised money, how our communities have used their creative faculties to support themselves. And I think in the Filipino community specifically, that has been people pooling money to like get a space, to like make that space a community space. And obviously there's always problems with community centers and stuff like that. That's kind of historically what we've done. And like my mom, for example, was like a beauty queen in the 1970s Chicago, Hawaii Filipino Center, like Rizal Center, like, you know, fundraiser, because that's how people would raise money. They would be like, all right, get all the cute girls together and we'll get people to vote and we'll raise money like that. But like, if we're trying to divest from some of those, like I find problematic a little bit, unless we're like doing some like really fun, crazy, queer, like beauty pageant, you know, which is totally still a possibility. It's like, what are other ways we can do that? So if you're making books or zines and using that as fundraising, like I've seen a lot of people use that format recently to, you know, not only speak to their own experience, but also distribute that. And then it's important too for these things to go into archives or libraries or whatever. So this middle one here, Tropic Zine, is a magazine that's being produced here in Hawaii through Tropic. I guess she just calls it Tropic Zine. But anyways, this was a magazine that was all Filipino artists, Filipino American artists coming together. And Marika Emi is the editor of that. She's based here in Hawaii. And yeah, that was another piece where I was commissioned to make work for this document, and it was printed like offset print style. So this is a little bit more like fancy than these other more homemade zine kind of things. But there's so many different ways that I think what's special about this one in particular is that it is collaboration. And the same with this second one here, which was part of my thesis exhibition, which Champ actually has a piece in too. It was more about like, how are people coming together, and how do our visions come together into one specific document to have like an even larger impact and even larger, I guess it's almost like kind of like a mapping of people's personal experiences. And I think what's really been so awesome about, especially in the Filipino community, is like the more that we tell our individual stories and our individual experiences, the more of a diverse understanding and a bigger picture we have of what it really means to truly like be from a place, you know, like it's like being from Hawaii, there's so many different stories that could be told of people who are just growing up in Hawaii, right? And the same with the Philippines. So like the more that we can sort of detach ourselves from these like sort of generic national narratives of like what it means to be American. Like we know there's like an infinite amount of experiences that fit into that container. So how do we continue to grow that and like just keep expanding it and expanding those definitions so that we're not just continually stuck in one place? Because that's also where the those like negative prejudice even stems from. It's like the othering of people who don't fit into that container. Yeah, okay, so I'm just blabbing on here. This is an important slide for me because taking up space was one of the things that I really intentionally tried to do within the institution. I'm going to try to speak a little bit more to like school stuff, the work that I was doing at the University of Hawaii, because you guys are in Berkeley, right? And so you're also dealing with the institutional bullshit, but also like the privilege and honor and also resources of being within an institution and what that can do for you. So I specifically went to school, like I mentioned, to study Ilocano language. And when I got there, I didn't really think about how this institution would be racist. I was just really ready to like get into the archive and get into the material and get into the resources. And I consistently came up against a lot of prejudice and just sort of like awkward people, like awkwardly not knowing how to speak to me about the work that I was doing, people who were completely ignorant about the Filipino community, despite the fact that this community is like makes up 25% of the state of Hawaii. Just a lot of, yeah, misunderstanding and ignorance, and also some just like flat out, just like people being completely misinformed. So I made it a point to take over more space than I possibly could, like everywhere. Like I used the whole freaking building for all kind of different installations and performances. I took over the entire weaving studio and shoved all the looms over so we could weave coconut leaves. I invited an artist. This is Nico Hinden. She's a fantastic Maori artist who you guys should follow. And she was actually told by one of the white male professors that her work was like quote unquote primitive, and they were like just kind of giving her a lot of flack for being an indigenous artist, even though she was coming to Hawaii specifically to study kapa making, which is a Hawaiian traditional practice of bark cloth production. So she single-handedly is like restoring Maori kapa, and they were like basically not that supportive of her studying an indigenous practice within our like very Western art department. So for my thesis, I invited her back and we did a big workshop with like 25 people right in front of the art office. And it was really loud because she's like banging, like you're basically like hitting these wooden dowels like on another piece of wood to like beat out the plant material like into a strip like this. So we made a lot of noise, but in a way that wasn't like angry, I guess. So when I think about a lot of the anger that I personally harbor towards the institution or towards, just racism and racist people in general, and just like all of the shit that a lot of us have gone through to even get to these positions, right? Because even achieving like you guys are, getting into college, going to college, like there's a lot of obstacles to even get there. So props to everyone and us and Champ for like even being and having these conversations within our classrooms, because this is also something that is I would say relatively new, even though people talk about race and belonging and stuff in school, like still is relatively challenging to the status quo of the institution. So for me, taking up space physically and with materials, and I would, like play really loud Ilocano music, or like, just those kinds of different things that I see as interventionist, in sort of disrupting, again, like the everyday expectations of what's happening in the classroom space. And then one other thing, I loved this quote from Jeremijenko about lifestyle experiments. Okay, so lifestyle experiments, she mentions Thoreau, but I think there's other people who are probably better experimenters. But figuring out how to reimagine relationships to natural systems, not through consumption, but through taking the lifestyles over which we have agency. Wait, what? Through taking the lifestyles over which we have taking the lifestyles over which we have agency and changing them. Sorry, that couldn't process that there for a second. And I really truly tried to be a proponent of this. I struggled with this a lot in school, where people were telling me like, what is your art? Like people were like, I don't understand. What is your art? Like, what do you do? And I was like, honestly, like, it goes back to that whole art life conversation. Like, if you can just live your life in a way where you're consistently experimenting, you're consistently changing, like, what is it that you want to tweak and improve and change? And like, okay, if I do this way, how's that going to be? Like, to me, that's my art, like my whole existence, the way that I relate to myself and to others. I know that about art in this class, probably in also the context of Western art history, and like that being an object or a material, or often like, placed on a pedestal in that white box. But and I think in coming out of like a more tradition of like radical thinkers, I feel like my work is also just continuously brings up that question of like, what is art? Like, how can art even be part of our lives, when, like, I think in most of, most indigenous and most peoples of the ancient world, if we want to call it that, because I think our ancestors live with us now. I just put that in quotes, right? But our ancestors lived in communication with the natural world, with the spiritual world, and that was their art. So like, in separating this like art piece from our life piece, we've completely disconnected that connection, that relationship that we have. So in rebuilding that, which a lot of my work has been really about rebuilding that connection to motherland, to like actual land, to actual plants, to actual animals, all that kind of stuff, the ocean, by rebuilding that and finding that reconnection, we can just erase art, really. Like there's a great he's a contemporary artist, but he's also like a theory kind of art education theory guy. I'm blanking on his name. He's from Uruguay. Luis Kamnitzer. I feel like maybe he's related somehow to Berkeley somehow too. That you guys could look that up. No, I know he worked at the CUNY system in New York, but his whole proposal is like, abolish art department completely. Get rid of the art department and just utilize material exploration in every single other faculty. So for you guys who are scientists or engineers or literature people, or I don't know, wherever you guys are studying, it's like the production of art in terms of using materials to explore and imagine and experiment. His whole idea, Kamnitzer's concept, is like, we don't really even need an art department at all, because art in that sense really would diffuse throughout everything, and people would feel like it's okay to experiment in these different ways. So anyways, I'm just being long-winded here a little bit, sorry, but I think that lifestyle experimentation is one of the best ways in which you can make art, do art, be a creative artistic person without necessarily having to be like, well, I need these tools, I need this clay, I need this thing that's going to be separate from like everything that you're doing, like baking or sewing, or more domestic things that people have found political and personal meaning in, even though they may seem like just everyday action kind of stuff. So I'm going to share one more project that I just finished, and it's still kind of like happening. So upon leaving my MFA program, I had considered the idea of writing a letter to my department about how the various things that I had experienced, the various things that had been said to me and other people I knew. So I took a couple of weeks and I started collecting stories from people. I was just hitting people up and emailing people and calling people and be like, hey, do you have any stories of, you know, of any sort of embodied or experienced racism, of sexism, misogyny, whatever it is that you felt uncomfortable with in the art department? What was it and how do we improve that? And so I started collecting all this information from people and I decided to write a letter. So I wrote like a 7-page typed out letter. I sent it to a lot of different people. I think there were like more than 20 people who were revising it. We did like a Google Doc. We just like got it really, really nice and tight. And then I asked who wanted to sign on to it. And we were gonna, give it to the UH admin, our administration, the deans, the president, all the top level folks, and then also the department chair and the faculty of the art department. And so, yeah, as I was moving out of my studio, I took the time to ask people these questions. So you can kind of see I'm like in this totally blank room because my studio is completely empty. This was the last week of my key holding. And I basically wrote that letter out on a giant piece of paper, on 2 giant pieces of paper. And I had kind of consulted with a couple of other grad students. So it was pretty collaborative how we decided this would happen. I just happened to be the person writing it and performing it, right? But this was this painting of, I think it's St. Geronimo? I think St. Geronimo, like in his study, writing a letter. And I think it's important too, because we are talking about art and like understanding art history is really important to these conversations, because these are I feel like this is the mode of thinking that, not that we're like up against it, but like this is the dominant mode of viewing, right? Like this is the dominant mode of Western art history, like reflecting upon itself and, perpetuating these sort of images of like, who's the artist, who's the thinker, who's the scientist, who's this, who's that. And so what I did was I wrote out the whole letter, and then I had this sort of, I tried to like leave some like subtle references. So if you were looking at this picture just of me, you probably wouldn't make the reference to this image on the left. But I think it also is important that in considering how I was delivering this message to our department, I was trying to consider what are the languages that they best understand? How can I best get my language across in a way that's going to, be part of the vocabulary and the language that they understand too. I think that's a really important thing when you're trying to consider other people's point of view, is to be like, okay, well, if I come at you with this thing that you're not going to understand, then maybe you're going to be combative. But if I'm coming out of this lineage and history that I also respect, but I also know that there's other forms, that sometimes can be a way of speaking to power. Like it's a playing off of what already exists, right? And so, yeah, I basically wrote that, and a friend of mine, another grad student, helped photograph me placing it on the desk of our department chair. And then we decided that because no one's in the office, we're going to pin it to the wall. So we came in back into the office and grabbed it and pinned it to the wall. This is the pen that I used. It was actually like a pencil with this nib taped onto it, because I didn't have a regular pen. And I think writing with the pen and ink was also another reference to that, like just the formality of letter writing, right? And like how it's basically just me trying to write a complaint letter, but not just make it a PDF that I email off and it gets lost in the ether. Like there's an actual essence of material and power and energy that's existing in there, especially because I don't ever write with a pen and a nib, like a nib pen, like an ink, like that's just something I don't do. So then there's also the sort of tension between like me trying to figure out that material as I'm writing it that I thought was interesting too. So I wanted to share that particular thing with you guys because I think right now there are a lot of people who are raising their voices in various ways and writing letters, and letter writing to me, at least over the past like 6 months or whatever we've been in COVID, has been actually a really powerful place to channel energy, to channel like collective frames of mind that we're trying to see. And this letter in particular, I think we're going to end up turning it into an open letter to go public, because the department has actually not even responded to it yet, because there's like too much logistics going on. So whatever that means, will also say that I was inspired to do this particular action because the theater department, someone in the theater department wrote a play in response to the like Black Lives Matter statement that was released by the theater department. So theater was like, oh, Black Lives Matter to us. And then a Hawaiian student wrote a play in response that was basically, really? Because it doesn't actually look like it based on the works that you have us perform, based on the professors that exist in this department, based on, the diversity of the student body. So when I was speaking to my friends and colleagues in theater, they were like, yeah, I mean, this is actually like what, this is actually what we did. And I was like, oh man, then the art department needs to do something too, because we're the only other, creative, what quote unquote, creative faculty, like within the whole school. We need to sort of be united on that front too, in terms of artists speaking back to power within the institution. And yeah, Hawaii has a really long history. The university has a really, really long racist history, like all institutions do, that also is very, very much still a part of the fabric. So we created this letter with a list of 10 demands of different things that we would want the department to address. And I'm sure Champ can speak a little bit more to like how he's done that and like held different faculty and staff accountable within Berkeley. And Berkeley is like the freaking epicenter of student revolt since like the beginning of time, basically. We'll just say that, and we'll give you guys that. So like I feel like I'm gonna stop now, and we can take like 20 minutes to just kind of talk. Like I feel like sometimes, yeah, we can maybe discuss. Oh, and then I'll show you a couple slides from my MFA thesis just real quick, because that's like kind of fun to look at. So I know this is kind of like still on my thing. Can we see this? This was the space that I made that was basically I called it an occupation of the gallery, which I created to sort of hold workshops and film screenings and different conversations about, oops, that's not gonna work, about Ilocano language and the use of plant material in our historical and ancestral ways. So maybe I'll just, oh shit, and I guess I can't leave that up there, and like we can't all talk and leave this image up there, can we?
We can do it. Yeah, we can just talk, I guess.
Yeah, is that cool if you guys have Q&A? I'll just leave that up there because this is almost like we're gathering in that space now. I'll make my window look like it, and then I'll screenshot it for you guys. But yeah, so I know I said a lot, and maybe it wasn't like in too much detail. I was trying to just give you guys like a couple different projects I've been working on recently, but if anyone has any questions, you can feel free. And also there's the chat box if you want to use that.
Yeah, hi, my name's Shantanu, and I was, first of all, thank you so much for taking some time to talk to us. I found this to be really engaging and insightful as someone who's not really an artist by profession or interested in that. And one thing I was wondering is, when you talked about writing the letter to your department and that process and, putting it on the wall in a larger piece of paper and whatnot, you also mentioned, you didn't put in a PDF and some of the reasons behind that. And I was curious, do you feel like that really does make a difference in the impact?
Oh, great question. So at the end, so this is what I did. Like I wrote it all out. We had the document. And I had thought, well, I probably have to send this as an email, like also, you know. So I did actually send it as an email, but mainly because when I went in the office and pinned it on the wall, the admin folks, so the people who run the office were like, you know, no one's really been here. And I was like, well, that's okay. You know, like whoever is here will see it. Right. But they were like, well, you know, it's like, I actually printed hard copies that I sent through the mail, that went to the dean's office and the Title IX office and to the president's office. So I sent all of those through the mail. That was the one specifically for the art building. But then they were like, you should probably send this as an email because it's going to get lost. And I was like, it's going to get lost. It's on the wall, man. Like, I don't know how you're going to lose it. I mean, maybe someone will take it down or whatever. I mean, that was the other thing. I didn't know what would happen. Someone could very easily be like, bloop, okay, it's gone. You know, hide that. Especially because there are a lot of allegations, accusations of some fucked up shit on there. So I tried to give it a materiality that would have impact visually, right? And the documentation of that via photography is really important, or video. So again, that's another thing that's like distributable. I actually haven't shared any of these images with anybody yet. So you guys are getting like sneak peek. So maybe we can talk more about it. It's actually a good forum for this, because I wanted to save it almost as like part of like, I think you really have to think about the PR of something like this too. So and I actually have someone that I'm speaking with who's like a PR person, a communications person, to be like, what's the best way to do this on a public scale as well? So like I was trying to give this department the benefit of the doubt and also like a space for internal reflection that I thought they deserved, instead of just publicly shaming them. Because Hawaii is such a small, intimate place, people know each other really well. That's like not a very big art community. I felt like if I was just like, rah, like UH is racist, rah, publish it in the papers, you know, it's like, is that really going to create an environment for true reflection for people? And there has been some weird sort of like, you know, I've had one professor came to me and was like, absolutely, totally, 100% support you. Another person was like, well, this is really hard. We have a lot of emergency stuff that we're handling right now. It might take a while for us to get back to this. I had another professor who blocked me and a lot of other people on Instagram. So like, what is like all the different responses that we're getting are part of that, right? So the PDF, even the dean's responses, the one female dean responded like immediately. And so like, even though the impact is physical in a physical space, there is going to be additional reverberation, like wherever that plays out, wherever your relationships play out, right? So the PDF, even though I printed and sent print copies to everybody, I still did send the email copy because I knew that that's where most people are also operating right now. But I said in the email, just FYI, there's a handwritten version of this up in the art office that you should probably go look at. And unfortunately, I like couldn't, I like thought that I lost my SD card. Like, I just like didn't think, I just messed up the photo part of it. I was like, oh my God, there's no photos, shit. And then I found the SD card later. But ideally, I wanted to send pictures of it to them as well, so they could understand that it was like a tangible item and not just like this PDF that I was sending. But I think that's a really important question, because I do think a lot about the digital versus the material. And I mean, digital is material too in a certain way, but I think coming out of photography, thinking about like working in the darkroom print version versus like just something on our phone that we send like as currency, like how that has a certain value to it. And then again, it's like the replicatability or whatever of those things, like they were saying in the office, like if people aren't coming up and seeing it on the wall, then maybe you have to go digital with it, you know.
Yeah.
Especially right now in the global sense, like we wouldn't be doing this if you know, we didn't have this format. So yeah, thanks for that question though. Does that kind of give you a little bit?
Yes, it does. And I definitely get how, you know, COVID and quarantine has affected that type of perspective and like that actions that we take in response to that dilemma. I guess I was just wondering because, you know, at Berkeley, there was actually recently a push by the students, undergraduate and graduate, to rename some of the buildings. And like, but that was like the beginning, like spearhead, the tip of the spear. And there's some other initiatives that are being pushed now. And those are all developed in Google Docs. And as a physics student, like through my experiences with the physics department, I feel pretty confident saying, even if COVID didn't happen, those responses and those initiatives would have been pushed over Google Docs, not necessarily in a published or physical manner. And I guess this also ties back to what you were saying about, you know, how do you reach and communicate with people in ways that they understand the communication? Because I think that's something that perhaps physicists, as very tech involved people, perhaps, and you know, as maybe just people in academia, I'm not entirely sure. Perhaps like, you know, email and PDF and Google Docs is the language that they understand, that, you know, that group of people understands better. But I guess that's the perspective which I was thinking of this through. So yeah, your answer does help with that. Thank you.
No, and I think that's totally right too. I mean, so Sarah Ahmed, I don't know if you guys have read her or listened to her. I can type her name in the chat. It's her last name is Ahmed, like Ahmed. Sorry, Sarah. And if you look her up on, she's written a lot. She's a wonderful scholar and academic and thinker. But she has great YouTube videos, and one of them that I had like open while I was writing this is called On Complaint. And it's all about institutional complaint and utilizing the flows that have been created by the institution, you know, which in this sense would be like a formal complaint letter or like other forms of like filing a complaint, and using those as radical tactics. Even though you're within the institution, you're still doing it in the way that they want you to. Like the importance of actually doing that and following through with it, instead of, you know, because like how many of us have like been like, okay, well, this crappy thing happened to me, but like whatever, I don't have the wherewithal to even deal with it because I'm so busy, I'm a student, I'm working, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. That's where I think collectively it's very important to work together. So like you're saying, taking down the names, that actually happened here at UH. There was a name of a building that was some racist ass dude who was like doing this research in the 1920s about like how people who work on sugarcane plantations are like less mentally whatever developed than, you know, like basic eugenics. It's eugenics really. A lot of eugenics thinking was developed here at the University of Hawaii. So it took students 10 years to get the name off that building, but it happened, right? And like we live, like the street that runs right by the university is called Dole Street. Champ knows Dole pineapples, plantation shit, you know. So students have tried to get that name changed as well. So I do think like these are there are histories of these actions that have been taken. So like you're saying, like the language is always going to keep changing, but we do have the same kind of responsibility, I guess. It's just like it's like another year, another racist name taken off a building, you know. Any other questions, you guys, or just ideas you want to share?
I want to address something too, Rebecca. Maybe yeah, I was curious because I know you really are thinking like this collectivity, and maybe you can talk briefly too about just like how technology, like especially right now, like plays a role in that form of like collectivism, like especially in terms of like creativity and being able to like, again, like work within these you know, these formats, which again a lot of people are still like figuring out, right? And not still sure how that kind of engagement is with like, you know, like let's say for like your work and like social practice, like how that, you know, again like affects you, I guess, and how you're kind of imagining a lot of these new possibilities, if any.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I get really paranoid about technology lately. I'm like, even just thinking about like the fact that we wrote all that in Google Docs, like there, like the security question is important to me. But I mean, I personally have just been using Zoom, and Jitsi is another one that I like to use. If you guys haven't used that, that one I feel like is a little bit more like quote unquote secure in terms of, I mean, I'm not, everyone's like, well, I'm not just like planning to bomb the Pentagon, so why do I have to care about my internet security? And it's like, well, there's so much there. I mean, I don't want to go too deeply into it. Just Google what's her face who wrote Surveillance Capitalism. What's her name?
Like what's the one of the
Is she even at Berkeley? Oh no, she's at Harvard, I think. Shoshana, something with a Z. Just YouTube her. Surveillance Capitalism, Shoshana. Watch that video, whatever that is. Like the ways in which we're being surveilled and our data is being collected so deeply and mined and, used to manipulate us in so many different ways is very disturbing to me. I feel like that could be like a whole other like route that I go down, just in terms of like, how can you be like a secure organizing artist, and make sure that your data is not being used against you. I think I thought about that, like if you guys saw The Great Hack or whatever, like the way that like voter data and democracy, quote unquote democracy, is being undermined by like these companies that are basically just hired to get people to vote. I mean, I think that's totally happening for real, like in many different capacities. So, and I always wonder like, oh, if they can do that to like people who are right leaning, what, of course they can do that to the left. Like why could they not? And what kind of radicalization is happening, and how anyways, Instagram has been a major platform for me in terms of like sharing my work and connecting with a lot of other people. Like the work that I do with the Ilocano community and the Filipino community never would have happened if I wasn't inspired by all the different artists. I mean, that includes Champ, because we're part of the same like larger diasporic Filipino community. None of that would have, my work wouldn't have even like remotely gone down the path that it did if I wasn't like seeing what other folks were doing too. And it's not just Filipinos, it's other artists of color, queer artists, whatever. But I do think that as much as that is beneficial to us, like there's also like these flip sides of it. So I do try to use like more secure when I can. Like I'll use Jitsi, I'll use Signal. I know that WhatsApp is owned by Facebook, so I always try to like at least give myself an option for like some other kind of secure. You guys probably know way more about this than I do. I like basically need someone to like train me up. And like my girlfriend just texted me today. She's like, my phone got hacked by this Russian teenager and I have all his pictures on my phone now. And I'm like, what? Like that could happen to me, and all my information, like whatever that is, like we give out so much information all day long, right? um but so I will say that as just like sort of side note to my main point, which is probably that since all the COVID stuff started happening, I mean, I've been consistently connecting and broadening my network online. I've been recently more involved in like the Jewish people of color community and working with Jewish Voice for Peace and connecting to more Jews of color like all over the world, really. And we never ever would have imagined something like this to like connect us all in this way. And so that to me is really powerful. That to me is like, okay, Zoom, whatever, Zoom can like listen in on our convos, but like now that we've made these connections, there are other ways for us to fortify our movement building and our organizing, to actually have campaigns to like I just got an email this morning that this woman Rashida, and I can't remember her last name, but she was running for office, I think in New Jersey. She's a Palestinian American, and JVP ran a phone banking thing for her, and she just won. So now she's in office, right? So like especially on the local politics level, the organizing that you can do with a powerful ass tool like Zoom, like I have a call tonight with an organization called Corona Care, and we've been providing food and masks and all kinds of different services, and you know, connecting people with kapuna, which are elders who need food delivery, like all the mutual aid stuff that kind of started happening right after all the COVID stuff started locking everything down. None of that would have been possible if like we hadn't been working with 3 or 4 amazing tech people who all like knew these different technologies to get drivers. I mean, it's like this other level, right, of coordination. But I think the question is, how can that be done, and then how can that be done safely in terms of in the safety of like the protection of everyone's data. I actually went to school, grade school, with Brittany Kaiser, who was the woman who was the whistleblower on the kind, what's it called? I'm sorry, I'm having like a lot of brain fart moments today, guys. It was basically the company that Trump hired to do all his ads and stuff for the last campaign, the data analysis firm, Cambridge Analytica. So that the woman who was the person who blew the whistle on all of that stuff, like we were good friends in grade school. I had no idea what she was doing now. She was just like a random person in my life, like a random Facebook friend, you know. But when I saw that film was made about her and other people, she wrote a book too. Now all her work is about data protection, and data sovereignty is also another thing that in my studies and like being around Indigenous communities and you know, listening to what's important to their communities right now, data sovereignty is like number one. Like being able to produce your own data, being able to analyze your own data and produce just I guess analysis of that data so that you're not buying into the same narratives and perpetuating the same narratives that have been created by the data that's been made about our communities. So it's like we need to be researchers, as artists, as you guys are as researchers in whatever field you're in. You have to do the work of like collecting the data, creating the data, and then making a reflection upon that that's going to tell a story that's different. And I don't always love the storytelling like narrative because I'm not necessarily that person who's like, I'm a storyteller or whatever. Like I don't think I really am. Like I can talk about myself, but I don't think I'm like a storyteller, and like some people really embody that like persona. I feel like I'm more of that person who just wants to like get people together to talk about stuff. But I will say, yeah, the data sovereignty piece, it's like everyone thinks that all of our communities are ill, right? Like they're like brown communities in the United States, there's diabetes, there's this, there's heart disease, there's that, and there is. But what about our health? Like what is flourishing? Like what is actually good about all of our communities? How do we put more money towards that? How do we put more money towards like preventative and holistic, not just healthcare, but like community development? And I think that's where that abolish the police conversation and abolition kind of comes together there, because it's like we're seeing the ways we have the data of the ways in which our communities are totally fucked, right? But we don't necessarily have the data and the visuals of how incredibly connected and supportive and rich our people are like doing things for each other right now. So that's kind of like technology blends into that for me. It's about being able to facilitate the work that needs to be done. But I think because a lot of you guys are probably working with data in one way or another, it is important to that piece about data sovereignty, in just thinking like, yeah, what do you own? Like what is yours? And I mean, our data literally is the thing that they want the most from us right now. So gotta be vigilant.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I think that's such a great point, especially like thinking about these as like, again, like just tools also, right? Like more like container of like the ideas that we kind of able to put in practice. And I love that you pointed out too, like thinking about what kind of are the positives in a lot of things, because most of the time that's really what we see, and that's also how like we are exposed to most of the time, that we sometimes do not think that people are already doing things and already like doing actions that are, again, maybe like going down in that kind of transformation that needs to happen in general. So yeah, I was curious if anybody has any other questions for Rebecca from what she shared, or just in general, any comments, just to kind of hear what you think about some of the things that were brought up, just sounds.
I'll go. I looked at that Indigenous artist Instagram that was put in the chat, and a lot of her pieces and just a lot of things that she had on her page were really like interesting to look at, and like, I don't know, gave me good feelings, felt nice. I enjoyed it.
Awesome. That's Nico.
Yeah.
She's amazing. She's one of the most powerful artists that I've met, and so much of her work inspired me to do more reclamation of my own heritage too. And it's not just about my brownness. Like, I'm half German. I studied German in college. I have my undergrad is in German studies, and I lived there for a year, and I go back there, you know, when I can. But then her diving deeply into her Maori history. She's also half, I think she's English, but Jewish. So like there is other history that she isn't necessarily like going into in her work, but we talked about that a lot, as like all of us coming from these many different, you know, manifestations of all of our ancestors. Like how do we look to their guidance and their knowledge to like keep moving forward? And Nico's one of those people who's just like, she's just relentless. Like nothing stops her. She just totally, like a lot of those paintings that you're looking at and referring to are like, they're all star paintings. Like they're not just triangles, like generic triangles on paper. They like are star maps, and they're all about navigation. She learned how to, and is still learning how to navigate. That's also another practice that, you know, all of our ancestors practice is ocean and seafaring navigation. And that's maybe not something that we think about as much like on the continent, where we're kind of more landlocked, or like maybe in Berkeley people are like sailing or something like that. But yeah, those kind of practices, they're so essential, because they're like the basis of all of our humanity. It's like how we move around. And one thing that I really like to share that comes from Hawaiian thinking is that voyaging wasn't about packing a boat and going off to a foreign land to like find something. It was about drawing what you wanted in the future towards you. So you were stationary. Like in Hawaiian voyaging cosmology and thinking, like the voyager is stationary and everything is coming towards you, and you're drawing it towards yourself. So I think I try to also see, you know, I mean, Hawaiian thinking descends also from Austronesian language and the movement of people all throughout the Pacific that supposedly, theoretically, they say started in like southern, like Okinawa, like the islands, the Batanes, like above the Philippine archipelago, that language group descended out through the Philippines. They went to Madagascar, they went to Tahiti, they went to Hawaii, they went to Chile, they went to Alaska and the Pacific Northwest. I mean, they were epic voyagers. And that visionary thinking of envisioning where it is you want to go, that's where we need to be. That's the kind of thing we should be harnessing, like in terms of our ways of manifesting. Like that's where the radical imagination is so important.
Yeah, and to, you know, piggyback off what you're saying, I think again the artistic activity really is helpful in like like the process of realizing what is impossible, because as I've said before to the class, it's like you have to be able to imagine that, like, you know, because if like even like, you know, we talk about this a lot about like defunding the police or what another world looks like, right? Like it cannot happen unless you can imagine that being like happening, what that looks like. So yeah, no, that's like a very, very profound thing to share. Yeah, anybody else want to share something in regards to that, or just any other comments with what Rebecca has shared today? Or, you know, in relation to also like projects that you might have going or ideas that you might be, I don't know, fermenting on for our final project, or just other previous things that we've talked about in class that you want to bring up. Anything?
Kitty. Or can I just get I mean, crap, I can't see the chat, but I'm wondering what departments you guys are in. Like, what are you guys studying?
Oh yeah.
I got a quick question.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
So early in the presentation, you showed like your work with it was like a book, and it kept on showing different images. For like my final project, I'm really interested in the idea of like making like a comic book type thing it almost acts like a motion picture. And when I seen yours, how it was operating, I'm like, oh, I can kind of use that format. So
Yes.
how did you do that?
It's a GIF. I made it with my phone. I got an app. It's called Image Play.
Okay.
IMG Play. It's like a little orange little logo. So easy. I recommend that app for anybody, honestly. Like, it's free. I think there's like an upgraded version where you can do like way more cool shit, but I make a lot of GIFs. I think a GIF is a great, it's an animated image. It's like a recycled image, right? So it can loop forever. It can be a video. I use my phone a lot for stuff. Like, I try to, you know, do as much as I can, just whip it up like that. It's fast. But there's other ways to make GIFs and animations, like in Photoshop. I don't want to describe it right now because the process is like a little bit weird. And Champ can give you my email and stuff too, or write down my email and I can email and we can like do a chat about it, whatever. Or you could just YouTube make animation in Photoshop. That probably teach you better than I can.
Okay, I think I can do that one.
Yeah, but I love the GIF because, like you said, like it's quick. You get a lot of information in there. It's basically like a looping video forever.
Okay, thank you, appreciate it.
You're welcome. And you can put it anywhere too. Like, you can put it in text, you can put it on a web, you can put it in an email. It's always going to move.
Okay, nice.
Did you still want to make people like write down what departments or what kind of field they're in?
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to know if people here. I'm gonna
people
stop my share and we can go back here. And I think then, oh yeah, image play. There we go.
Yeah, if people can just type what.
Just type it in the field. It's totally fine.
I mean, I'm assuming everybody's a student.
Art, yay.
Is it cog-sci, cognitive science, right? Yeah.
Cognitive, oh, data science, yes. Math, environmental science, cool. Mechanical engineering, art practice and history, physics. Physics is so cool. Molecular environmental biology, like I don't even know what that is. Computer science, yes. Honestly, I wish I had done a little bit more technology in school. Like, I kind of went interdisciplinary studies. Yes, good. That's the best. Honestly, you guys are so smart. Econ. Like, you guys are, I mean, I'm 33, so you guys are generation pretty much behind me and Champ. And like, I'm just so blown away by the technological knowledge of your guys' generation. Like, we still grew up like without the internet, you know. Like, I'm not trying to age us, Champ, but like, I feel like there's certain part of me like as much as I want to do more tech stuff, like I feel like I'm at a level, and I could level up a little bit more with my technological like integration of technology into my art making. But what I think is cool is that there are people who are really good at that, and you can always team up. Like it's not my job to be a dope data scientist, because that's not, you know, that's not what I've done my whole life. Not that I have to, but like if I team up with one of you guys who's a data scientist, like the work that you could do together is like, like that much better and that much more engaging. And I really encourage you to, you know, that's something that in our department, like they were kind of like, yeah, you guys should like work interdisciplinary with other departments. But that was a demand on our list, was why is it that the art department is so isolated? People aren't working interdisciplinarily. Like if one of you guys was like, hey, I'm going to work with a glass blower and we're going to blow 10,000 tiny little things that are going to represent data points that are going to do this other thing, you know, like there's so many ways you could do it together. And I think the institutions need to be more flexible with the ways that that happens. Like maybe your homeworks are collaborating and like overlapping. There are 4 different classes, but they still apply. And that way, you know, it's all about like consolidating time and resources and resource management. And if you can do that with a classmate and you can make something powerful of that, like it's just going to be that much better. Like my work was basically 3 years collaborating with the Ilocano program, and we did a lot, you know, we like did a lot of work together that was beneficial to us, but it was better to me and them, but it was also beneficial like just to the environment of the art department and the environment of the Ilocano department. Because like at bringing arts and bringing, you know, material experimentation into that classroom was very different than how it had been operating. And then bringing Ilocano language and culture into the art department was extremely important for the environment and the ecosystem of the art department, which wasn't used to having that kind of conversation. So if you guys can do that, and that's awesome, especially for a lot of you guys who are in the hard sciences, where there's like, you know, it feels really stiff. It feels like there's not very much room for change, but there's so many examples of incredible collaborations with artists, like in science. It's meant to be, you know.
I'm glad you brought that up, Rebecca, because it's been coming up a lot too, because we do a lot of artist presentations when we talk about the works of various artists, especially like, you know, the bigger scale and bigger projects. And this is something that came up a lot, where it's almost like the artist, not even really just artisan or making something, but also as a project manager, almost like you're kind of in charge of like multiple people, like a team, and certain people are more like, you know, doing like specific tasks. And again, you know, you're part of this almost like a production. So that is like, again, a way of like thinking like, but thinking in it also as a form of collaboration, even though like, you know, because that is also like part of the art world kind of like paradigm, right? Or like where the name is just the one artist, but really it is a whole studio. It is a whole, you know, there's a whole number of like people like really generating like the work, what the work is. But, you know, like thinking of how the artist then becomes just more like these purveyor of ideas, and just you kind of like your, but yeah, I don't know, like that's come up a lot because a lot of folks,
The labor.
yeah, exactly, and the labor, and then, you know, how, what are the ways in which they can be credited, right? Because even though, let's say it's like the show, it says the artist's name, but then also I've seen artists where they do actually have a credit list where it's almost like, you know, just like writing down like who did what.
Absolutely.
But yeah, but I feel like the bigger the artist, it becomes blurry, because, you know, they just kind of have this like secret studios, and, you know,
It's just that production.
yeah, so it's all about production. So
Yeah. The labor is a huge question, and I didn't mention that, but I encourage everyone to consider that. Like, I think especially because I have been thinking about Filipino work. Like, what is that? Now it's health. I mean, it's always healthcare, and like thinking about my family history, right? And like, where do people work? What do people do? My dad's a professor. My mom is trying to go back to work at Crate and Barrel right now. And it's like the maintenance of the domestic sphere is Filipino or brown labor a lot of the times here, you know, whether that's like providing the goods to make your home a certain way, whether that's cleaning, whether that's childcare, domestic, any kind of domestic labor. And from a feminist perspective, domestic labor is like the basis of the entire patriarchal system, sits upon the fact that women do unpaid labor at home all the time, and that kind of labor supports everyone else going to work and everyone else doing their work. If you don't have clean underwear and a breakfast and a whatever basically maintained sort of living experience, you won't be able to function in this capitalist society. So if we are to truly think about redistributing resources and wealth and, you know, whatever, that also requires a true revolution of labor distribution, and especially the liberation of women and brown and black people, because those are the people whose, you know, upon us falls the majority of the responsibility, and we don't get paid for it. So that's like a whole other thing. But for the economics people, you know, Sylvia Federici, I mean, there's a million different feminists who think about labor in that way, but I think it's definitely worth conversating and just considering when you're thinking about what you're doing too. And like, I think about this a lot. Man, shoot. And then I realized I gotta go, you guys. Sorry, I have like gotta go to an appointment. Like, but it's okay. I just want to finish this last thought. That is, yeah, like who even makes the stuff that we're using to make stuff? That's why I didn't even want to be a painter or anything. I was like, ew, where does this weird shit come from? Like, maybe it's better if I have like a direct connection. That's why I started growing my own plants and working. I have a cotton plant that's about to flower. And when that flowers, I'm going to have cotton, and then I'll be able to work with that material, right? But like, I put the work into growing that thing. I didn't like, you know, I have bought materials from other places, but then who is making that? How can we have any sense of autonomy within capitalism in terms of material work, right? Like, I mean, that's why you buy everything secondhand. That's why you do certain things. That's why you make free stores. That's why you do all these other kinds of interventions, right? But you're also like, it's a consistent, and that's where the lifestyle experimentation thing comes. I just go right back to that, because everyone can make choices in their daily life. It could be small, it could be large. I feel like there's some like book that's like 100 anarchist things to do every day, you know, and it's just like little tweaks, and every little adjustment that you make as you grow and change, like it can be working towards like that imagination that you see as being possible. Like, look what has happened since Black Lives Matter, like blew up several years ago. Like, we've made changes, and I think we still will keep making changes. I think it's just about like really trying to see it and where you want to go with it. So
thank you so much. That's such a great way to maybe like end the talk. It's such a very great like talk. I mean, we could go on. Rebecca and
I could go. We spiel forever. Me and Champ, we're like blah blah blah.
But this is very, very like great way to, again, you know, like to share it with everyone in the class, because, you know, like most of the things we talk about, and I really want everyone to also hear just your own perspectives about these things. And, you know, I was wondering if you want me to share your IG.
Yeah. Go ahead. I think
people can reach
you.
Go
for it. I'm gonna put my email here too. If anyone has like random questions, like please feel free to follow me or reach out or message, whatever. Like, I'm really happy to engage. Like, I try to speak to anyone I know who's a teacher. I'm like, let me know if I could talk to your class. So thanks to Champ. You guys have an amazing instructor, and it's just like he's doing a lot of really amazing radical stuff at Berkeley too. And we've been like on a tandem path, and I feel like I'm out of the institution now, but like I feel like Champ's like still out there. He's got his torch.
Yeah, and again, you know, this is like an opportunity for especially folks who are not like, again, more inclined to do a lot of art, or like thinking about art in just a very specific way, to really like, I'm just seeing how our class has been able to really make work, and again, you know, like address a lot of these things. It's just very I feel like hopeful that, you know, that that maybe art at
Yes.
school can be, again, as generative for you in whatever field or your whole life, just like as a tool and as a practice. So yeah,
Absolutely.
thanks so much again, Rebecca, for doing this talk, and we
Thank
really
you guys so much for
appreciate it.
listening. And thanks, Champ, for the invitation. You guys are awesome. Just keep doing what you do and you'll be great. Enjoy it. Enjoy school and get the money. Okay, bye, you guys.
Bye, Rebecca.
Have an awesome day. Mahalo. Aloha.
Bye. Stop recording.